Part 4 of our story of Athanasius ended with Athanasius's third exile. He is exiled because of the soldiers that come into the church. And these soldiers were sent by Emperor Constantius. Emperor Constantius was pleased with the reports that came from Alexandria. The Arians were gaining control of the churches. Athanasius was gone. The time had come to show the Christians of Alexandria that their emperor wanted the best for the people in his empire. Officials read the emperor's letter throughout the city of Alexandria. Now that the impostor has been driven out of your city, the emperor wrote, I am going to send you a bishop above praise. You will find in George of Cappadocia the wisest of teachers. If ever there was a man fit to lead you into the kingdom of heaven, it is he. Welcome him into your city. You probably remember the word Cappadocia because during Athanasius' second exile, there was a man called Gregory of Cappadocia. But this one is this bishop that the emperor chooses is George. The believers protested, but Athanasius is our bishop. The Arians scoffed. Has Athanasius perhaps become an invisible bishop by his magical arts? We recognize only one bishop in Alexandria, George of Cappadocia. Heathens, Arians, and faithful Christians lined the streets of Alexandria when George of Cappadocia rode into their city surrounded by a large troop of soldiers. They watched as a man who knew more about butchering pigs than about the Bible moved into the bishop's residence. The building where Athanasius had once spent many hours in study and prayer was occupied by a man who could not read the scriptures or any other book. The soldiers who escorted Bishop George to his residence stayed in Alexandria, ready to carry out the new bishop's orders. Bishop George summoned the bishops of Egypt. He questioned them sternly. Do you abide by the creed of the church? 26 bishops answered firmly. We recognize no creed except the creed of Nicaea. Only the creed of Nicaea says that the Son of God is of one substance, homoousios, with the Father. Our bishop, Athanasius, has always defended this creed, and we will do the same. Bishop George refused to hear any more. He deposed the 26 bishops. In their place, he chose Arians, rich Arians. Those who could pay the most became bishops. Bishop George also took action against faithful Christians. One Sunday morning, he sent 3,000 soldiers to a graveyard where Christians were worshiping in secret. The soldiers surrounded the congregation. Men, women, and children watched fearfully as the soldiers built a large fire. Several soldiers separated a small group of young women dressed in identical robes and veils. Roughly, the soldiers dragged the women to the fire. Declare that you are an Arian or be burned in the fire, a soldier shouted. The women refused. They had dedicated their lives to serving Christ. They would give their lives before they served a Jesus who was not truly God. Before the horrified eyes of the congregation, the soldiers hit and kicked the defenseless women. Swords and clubs stopped any men from coming to their rescue. Children hid their faces and covered their ears to knock out the horror. Women wept as they clutched their screaming babies. When the last of the women had been beaten into silence, the soldiers left. The members of the congregation gently cared for the injured women whose faces were no longer recognizable. With quiet grief, they buried the ones who died. The believers in Alexandria lose one church building after another. Many of their priests are in exile, and most of the faithful bishops are in exile. Many of their priests are in prison, and most of the faithful bishops are in exile. Athanasius is not there to give them courage. Has God himself abandoned them? Do not fear, my beloved flock. God will comfort you. They may have the church buildings, but you have the faith of the apostles in your hearts. They may have the place of worship, but they are far from the church. But you, even though you are cast out from your churches, possess the faith in your hearts. This faith they cannot take away from you. Hold it fast. The believers rejoiced. God has not abandoned us. They heard the voice of their beloved bishop in the letters that arrived silently and mysteriously in their midst. The bishops in exile and the priests who tried to remain faithful rejoiced. God has not abandoned us. They heard the voice of Athanasius in writings that instructed and comforted them. An invisible bishop moved among the believers in Alexandria. No one saw him coming when Athanasius stole into the city for a night visit. Like a mysterious shadow, he walked the dark black streets and alleys to find the members of his flock. Before the light of day dawned, he was gone again, not to return for many weeks, sometimes months. Bishop George heard rumors that disturbed him. The Arians had heard the rumors too. Athanasius must be hiding somewhere in the desert, they told Bishop George. Bands of soldiers scoured the desert and the banks of the Nile River to hunt for Athanasius. The soldiers found bands of monks, but there was no sign of Athanasius. We questioned the monks, one captain reported to Bishop George. They only stare at us stupidly, as if they do not even understand our questions. They know nothing about anyone named Athanasius. All they do is pray and work. The praying and working monks who live along the Nile River and in the desert of Egypt are neither stupid nor ignorant. They are Athanasius's eyes and ears and feet. Monks warn Athanasius when soldiers come and hide him in caves and wells until the danger is past. Monks guide him along the Nile and through the desert to find places of safety. Monks deliver his letters and writings. Monks pray constantly for Athanasius and for the struggling churches in Egypt. Two strangers stepped on board the riverboat that was heading south down the Nile. As the boat pulled away from the shore, the strangers moved quietly among the passengers. "We are looking for a dangerous criminal named Athanasius," one of the strangers explained quietly to a group of passengers. "Have you seen or heard anything of him?" The passengers shook their heads. The strangers moved on. "Do you know Athanasius?" they asked two other passengers. They too shook their heads. Just then another river boat approached them from the opposite direction. The strangers hurried to the pilot. As the second boat came within calling distance, one of the strangers leaned over the side of this to shout, "Halt!" Skillfully, the oarsmen steered their boats alongside each other. "We are looking for a dangerous criminal, a certain Athanasius of Alexandria," one of the strangers announced. "You good people have just come from the south. Perhaps you have heard some news of him." A small man in shepherd's clothing answered courteously, "Athanasius of Alexandria? Why, yes, I have heard of him. Just continue." He pointed to the direction from which he had come. "He is not far off." The boat carrying the two strangers continued south. The second boat continued north until it reached a river port. A small man in shepherd's clothing slipped off the boat and disappeared into the desert in the company of two monks. A young man dashed along the back streets of Alexandria. He burst into the house without knocking. "We have been betrayed," he panted. "Someone told Bishop George about this meeting. His men are coming." No one moved. Terror had paralyzed them. "Run! Hide!" he screamed at them. Men and women streamed out of the houses and disappeared into the night to seek safety in their own homes. Flickering torchlights announced the arrival of the soldiers. Their guide led them straight to the house. "Here," he announced triumphantly, "here you will find Athanasius." Soldiers banged on the door. When no one answered, they broke it down and searched the house. They found no one, not even the owners of the house. Soldiers poured out of the house and spread out to chase the man who had escaped them by mere minutes. Soldiers rushed by the house of Eudaimonis. The young woman turned away from the window when they were out of sight. "You must hide here for several days," Eudaimonis told Bishop Athanasius. "Once they give up the search, you can leave the city." "Dear child, my presence will put you in danger," Athanasius answered. "They will search the houses. What if they come here?" "Let us pray that you will be gone before they do," Eudaimonis answered. Athanasius escapes the soldiers, but Eudaimonis does not. Someone tells Bishop George what Eudaimonis has done. Soldiers arrest and beat her until she nearly loses her mind with the pain. They let her go when they cannot get any information from her about Athanasius. Monks bring Athanasius the news. He weeps bitter tears over the suffering of the courageous Eudaimonis. No more secret visits to Alexandria. He will not put the believers of Alexandria in such danger again. The pagans in the city of Alexandria could not contain their excitement. "Constantius is dead. The enemy of the gods is dead. Many years to Julian." More voices took up the cry, "Julian! Julian! Augustus!" They cried until their throats grew raw. Just then Bishop George rode by. All the hatred for the greedy, dishonest bishop burst like a flood. "Death to the enemy of the gods!" a voice cried. Screaming with rage, pagans dragged Bishop George from his carriage. It was over in minutes. George, the most hated man in all of Alexandria, would never again steal from and cheat the people of the city. Once he is firmly established on the throne, Emperor Julian reveals a secret. He is a pagan. Heathens all over the empire rejoiced. Arians and faithful Christians become fearful. But Emperor Julian is a clever man. He is not going to persecute the Christians. Rather, he is going to let the Christians destroy themselves with arguments and quarrels. He orders the return of all bishops in exile and waits for the fighting to begin. Emperor Julian's announcement brings joy in Alexandria. Athanasius, their beloved bishop, returns after 6 years of exile. So this would be the fourth exile. Emperor Julian was not at all pleased with the news about Alexandria. The reports mention no struggles and arguments among the bishops of Egypt. Bishop Athanasius has restored order in Egypt, the messengers reported. Exiled bishops are back in their own churches. Many Arians have joined the churches. Do you mean to say that Bishop Athanasius has given in to them? The astonished emperor asked. Oh, no, not at all, the messenger continued. Many Arians have repented of their previous ideas and actions. Emperor Julian frowned. Matters were not going according to plan. Have you any more news? He asked. How do the pagans fare in the city of Athanasius? The messengers hesitated. Athanasius and his priests and bishops are very zealous in their preaching, he began. He swallowed nervously. I have heard it said that pagans are becoming Christians in the city of Alexander. Emperor Julian stood up and began to pace the room. Pagans becoming Christians, you say? How many? A few or a small group? A few? A small group? I wish I could say that, the messenger answered miserably, but actually many pagans are becoming Christians. I knew it was a mistake to let Athanasius return to Alexandria, Emperor Julian raged. Call my scribe. A letter must go to Alexandria immediately. Athanasius must be removed. The emperor's letter brought dismay and sorrow to the believers in Alexandria. Athanasius refused to be downcast. Be of good cheer, he said. It is but a passing cloud. The shadow will soon be gone. For the fourth time, Athanasius is in exile. He travels all over Egypt to strengthen and encourage the believers in various cities. A year and a half later, his words about the passing cloud come true. Julian dies in a battle against the Persians. The new emperor is a Christian who supports the Creed of Nicaea. Athanasius returns to Alexandria, but not for long. The Christian emperor dies within a year. The next emperor is an Arian. Athanasius, now 66 years old, becomes a desert wanderer again. His fifth exile has begun. The people of Alexandria have had enough. They want their bishop back. Even the pagans agree. The governor of Egypt fears a riot in the streets of Alexandria. He warns the emperor. The emperor, Emperor Valens, does not send soldiers to Alexandria. Instead, he orders the return of Athanasius. For the rest of his life, Athanasius is left in peace. Athanasius did not live to see the end of the struggle against the Arians. Victory came 9 years after his death, when a council met in Constantinople. Church leaders changed the Creed of Nicaea so that it was clear that the Holy Spirit is also really and truly God. They kept the word homoousios to describe the Son of God. The truth which Athanasius had defended stood firm. Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, is God, of one substance with the Father. You should be able to finish that page 6 in your booklet, called Wicked Men.